story that has absolutely captivated American politics is something you just don't see every day. We turn to it right now. A recent former president under criminal investigation through his main company and form of business. The Trump Organization now confirmed under criminal probe. Prosecutors going right at the top executive, the money man, Trump Org financial officer Alan Weisselberg, who is under criminal investigation, including over taxes. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, has been criminally probing Weisselberg, and that's been going on for months, according to sources quoted by CNN. And the New York Times has had a lot on this story as well. This is what prosecutors do to press a key witness. They are working to get Weisselberg to fully cooperate in this Trump Org probe. Now, Weisselberg tapping a lawyer who specializes in tax and criminal defense. So you have Donald Trump's CFO getting his own legal counsel. That can be a sign of splitting. Meanwhile, a family member, Weisselberg's former daughter-in-law, Jennifer Weisselberg, under the previous name, has spoken several times to investigators. She's turned over boxes of documents. She admitted also to NBC, this was earlier this year, that Weisselberg would be the key to unlocking anything and perhaps everything these investigators want.
What do you think he could tell investigators?
Everything they would ask.
Do you think he could be the ultimate tour guide into the Trump orbit?
Yes. Alan Weisselberg is defined by what Donald thinks about him, about saving him money regardless, every day, proving his worth by doing that creatively.
The developments in this case have completely escalated this week. We're joined by Washington Post reporter Libby Casey. Dan Alonzo, a former chief assistant district attorney in the very Manhattan District Attorney's Office that's doing this probe, and Nick Ackerman, a former federal prosecutor with Watergate experience and also served in the SDNY. Thanks to all of you for joining us on what in any other night would be, of course, the top story. Nick, you have covered and been involved in many of these kind of sensitive investigations. One of the first rules is prosecutors always want to have their evidence right, but boy, do they want to have it right when going at big fish like this with the arrayed firepower they have. What does it tell you, big picture, this week that we learned the New York Attorney General is involved in this criminal probe? And second, what, if anything, do you glean from this Weisselberg news?
Well, what I see here clearly is that they really are doing a full court press now on Donald Trump for income tax evasion. We knew before that the New York Attorney General's office was involved, at least on the civil side. But now that they've actually had to come out and announce that they were also cooperating on the criminal side, says to me that they really are honing in pretty closely on Weisselberg, who is a key witness here, and on Donald Trump. I mean, this is the same thing that I did when I took over the Nixon tax investigation in the Watergate case. I mean, it is very important to get somebody who can put the knowledge and intent in Donald Trump's head to show that he knew what was on the return was false and that he was trying to defraud the U.S. government out of collecting its taxes. And Weisselberg is the key witness who can do that. He's the one that prepared the return. He's the one that worked with Trump in preparing those returns, and he knows what he said to Trump and what Trump said to him.
Daniel?
I think that's exactly right. This was a smart move for the DA to team up with the Attorney General, because remember, the Attorney General's been investigating this organization in various different ways for a number of years. They have a lot of information, and that's stuff that the DA wants to know, should know. Frankly, from all public reports, the Trump Organization kind of jerked the Attorney General around for a few years in terms of documents and depositions. And so you want to team up. You want to see that. The stuff about Weisselberg is incredibly important for the exact reason that Nick said, and another one, which is that Trump very famously doesn't use email. So one key tool that is often used by prosecutors to establish knowledge isn't there. So you really need the confidant. And in this case, it seems to be Weisselberg. So if that's what they're going after, they need Weisselberg.
As mentioned, you've literally been in this very office, this DA's office previously. From the public and available evidence, Daniel, does this look to you like mostly a tax case or like they have more than one thing?
You know, it's hard to tell. It's clearly partly a tax case, but they're also looking into representations made to get loans, to get insurance underwriting. I think that one significant area are these business records that they apparently falsified when they were reimbursing Michael Cohen for the Stormy Daniels payments, not just because of everything we've always heard, but for more reasons, right? They falsified records. They probably didn't only do it one time, right? What other payments have been made over the years and were not properly accounted for? The DA is going to want to know that, and they've got quite a team assembled to look for it.
And another question to you about your former office here. What about the rebuttal from people around Trump who would say, if this is about past conduct, tax, financial, or otherwise, where were the authorities in past years? If this was so important, why wasn't it investigated then? It would seem from the New York Times report that the feds, through the IRS and other agencies, slept on one of the greatest tax cheats ever. I say cheat rhetorically. I'm not saying crime. But people know from the Times report that most Americans pay more taxes than Donald Trump, who's worth a lot. So most people can think, gosh, you don't have to be an IRS expert to really look at that. Now, if they looked at it and they let it go for that many years, and then it only kicked back up when he became what he became in American political life, do they have any problem there in your view? And I understand you're sympathetic to the people you used to work with, but what about that legally?
You know, if I were still in the Manhattan DA's office, we might use the technical term chutzpah if that argument is made. I mean, the fact is it's a 5-year statute of limitations, right? So for substantive tax crimes, they can only go back 5 years. And for most of that time, Trump was in the White House resisting subpoenas for his tax records. They weren't even sent to him. They were sent to his accountants. I mean, Trump got extraordinary indulgence from the courts that no one else, in my experience, has really ever gotten. And maybe that's right because he was president. Obviously, there is at least the argument that he should have been heard, and he was heard. But nobody else gets that kind of indulgence. So now here they are. And now they're going back 5 years. And obviously, if it's a longer continuing crime, they can go back a little farther as well.
I think it's honestly a very strong legal counter-argument that to the extent the presidency comes up, it has only helped him thus far. It is not the source of his woes structurally. Libby, we've had the lawyers do their lawyer stuff. You know how lawyers are. You're here as a reporter who's tracking how this is all playing out. I think in some ways we've all become numb to this, but you know, George W. Bush was a controversial president in certain ways. Barack Obama had many detractors. George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan had various controversies. We have never seen in the modern era, since Nixon and the pardon, a recent president leave office and immediately be under criminal scrutiny like this. What do you see in your reporting about how this is playing out across Washington and the Republican Party as well?
Yeah, to have a former president under criminal investigation and happening along parallel tracks, it's just unprecedented, Ari. I mean, I think there is a sense of fatigue of Trump in one sense, but that can't excuse the significance of these investigations. And when you talk about tax fraud, when you talk about some of these details, there are elements of this here that the public can really understand and can really comprehend. In that New York Times reporting you're talking about, paying nothing or $700 in a tax return is something Americans can identify with. And so as we talk about this in the actual details and specifics, the questions about, for example, the Weisselberg family, perks they got, taxes they didn't pay on those potentially, that's something that people can relate to. We're not talking about sort of Ukraine and Democrats and Republicans. This is about dollars and this is about morality. And the fact that this has moved now from not just a civil situation but to a criminal situation is significant, not just for Donald Trump but all the other people here involved in this. I mean, Trump has dealt with civil lawsuits in the past over things like Trump University, the so-called charity, and he's paid out money. But that's very different stakes than going to jail, not just for Donald Trump, also potentially for his children, and also for the Weisselberg family as we look at exactly what threads they can pull out of how Alan Weisselberg's son was making his money, what sort of perks was he getting through the Trump organization, and how can those people be flipped or leaned on to go up to the top.
I think you put it really clearly, and that's such an important point that people can relate to, which is loyalty may matter, personal connections can matter, and if somebody finds out that it's going to cost them to stay loyal, say, do the thought experiment to a family member, a longtime friend. That's a different calculus, gosh, I got to pay that or whatever, to going to jail for someone. And Nick, because you've dealt with these cases where you try to roll up the line, it's not like Weisselberg, who's, I wouldn't say is a famous name to every American busy living their lives, but it's not like Weisselberg's coming out of nowhere here as some weird card for the DA to play. This is someone that we who followed this have heard about for a long time. Michael Cohen fingered him directly, pointed the finger at him in that blockbuster congressional testimony after he had broken with Trump. Take a look.
In the office with me was Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. Alan Weisselberg made the decision. Always Alan Weisselberg on the check. Mr. Weisselberg, for sure.
Nick, Mr. Cohen, of course, ultimately did time. He's also expressed regrets. We're also going to hear from him directly, shortly, live on the beat. But Mr. Cohen's also an attorney. What do you think the attorney mindset is there when you're giving your under oath testimony and you start saying, hey, everybody, there's a lot of evidence on that guy?
Well, I think in this particular case, as in all white-collar criminal tax cases, the accountant, the person who actually prepares the return, is always a critical witness. Because if you don't somehow turn the accountant or indict the accountant or leave the accountant on the side, the first thing the taxpayer is going to do is blame the accountant. They always blame the accountant or blame the tax preparer. And so it's either Weisselberg's guilty, Trump's guilty, or they're both guilty. And it's very important for the government to nail down Weisselberg.
I'll let you finish, Nick. Nick, I'll let you finish. Part of my job is saying it's also possible that they're not guilty. But go ahead.
It's possible. But the fact of the matter is, if you're making a tax case, a criminal tax case, you've got to have the tax preparer on board one way or the other. That is the key, because if you don't have him cooperating, he's going to turn out to be a defense witness. And so you have to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row And the biggest duck here is Weisselberg.
So you're saying, I mean, just so we really put a point on it, because it's important, you're saying the nature of his access and involvement in the underlying activities that these two prosecutors are now really deeply probing as a criminal matter is either you see him at the trial going, no, there's a really good reason. No, whoever it would be, in this case, it might be the owner, chief executive of the company. No, the CEO really did think it was okay. They didn't have that intention. Or you see him either in that chair or the other chair saying, I did what I was told. I feel bad about it. They were the one demanding we defraud the government.
That's exactly right. And that's why somebody in Weisselberg's position and duties is absolutely critical to this case. He's kind of like the Paul Manafort of the Russian investigation. And that's the way I'd compare him. He's in a position of knowledge and activity with respect to those tax returns that makes him absolutely essential.
But it's broader than that, Ari, if I can jump in. He's not just a tax preparer. I mean, I don't think he's the CFO of a corporation that is under investigation, not just for tax fraud, but for accounting fraud in general. And, going back to the days of Enron and the Corporate Fraud Task Force, the key witness in those cases has always been the CFO, the COO. So the CFO is really crucial. But I caution that he may not want to flip, and they may have a case against him. And this case may be People versus Alan Weisselberg. There may not be a Donald Trump charge if Weisselberg doesn't cooperate.
Well, we've underscored that on the program. The fact that big people are involved, and I'll go to Libby then quickly, the fact that big people are involved is always intriguing. But if we want to follow the facts, it's important that everyone understand they're investigating all these people. The person whose name on the front door may or may not ultimately be in the sauce. Libby, please. Go ahead.
We don't even know if criminal charges will ultimately result, right? But there's one thing we do know. Loyalty is a one-way street for Donald Trump, and that's something we know here in Washington. People like Kevin McCarthy have to be aware.
Well, we've underscored that on the program. The fact that big people are involved, and I'll go to Libby then quickly, the fact that big people are involved is always intriguing. But if we want to follow the facts, it's important that everyone understand they're investigating all these people. The person whose name on the front door may or may not ultimately be in the sauce. Libby, please. Go ahead.
We don't even know if criminal charges will ultimately result, right? But there's one thing we do know. Loyalty is a one-way street for Donald Trump, and that's something we know here in Washington. People like Kevin McCarthy have to be aware.
This week, the New York Attorney General announced her involvement in what is now a criminal probe into Trump org, and we are joined by the former personal attorney to Michael Cohen, who knows his way around that very organization. He is the host of podcast Mea Culpa. He's the author of the book Disloyal. And the news that we've been covering is this intense pressure on the money man, Weisselberg. Insiders have said he knows everything. Michael, I want to be clear. I mentioned this earlier, but now I have the benefit of you as a witness and more. You did call much of this earlier than much of this was confirmed in public investigations. Let's take a look.
In the office with me was Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. Mr. Weisselberg, for sure.
The only few people that in the Trump Organization that know anything about the taxes, Alan Weisselberg.
Alan Weisselberg made the decision. Always Alan Weisselberg on the check.
Walk us through what you saw.
I'm not sure
how
I
you
said
knew.
Alan Weisselberg's name enough.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure I said Alan Weisselberg's name enough.
Go ahead. Well, you can say it now. Go ahead.
Alan Weisselberg. Listen, Alan Weisselberg is certainly one of the keys that are being looked at. You know, I said this on Joy Reid's show last night on MSNBC, and I really stand by it. I think the person that's going to end up flipping first is going to be Donald Trump. I truly believe that, like your previous guest that you just had on, Donald Trump never put his name on anything. He had, as you know, no email. He very rarely texted, if ever, unless he was tweeting. And so what he'll do is he's going to turn and say, it wasn't me. It was my CFO. He's the one that did it. He worked with my accountant. It wasn't me. He'll blame everyone. He'll blame Ivanka, Don Jr., Eric, the accountant, Weisselberg, calamari, me. He'll blame anybody else other than to accept responsibility, because the two things that Donald Trump fears and fears most is, number one, losing his company, losing his money, and the second is losing his freedom. And he will do everything that he can to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I wouldn't be shocked if he would speak to prosecutors before anybody else.
Well, you mentioned that he's going to go and say it wasn't me, classic Shaggy defense. Barbara Rez, who worked at the Trump org, was with us as well. Take a look at what she says.
I think Weisselberg is very concerned about his kids. I think that what they're doing is the kind of thing they did with Flynn, remember, and his kid, and then he turned or he caved or whatever. I don't think Weisselberg would let his children go to jail.
How does that square with your view that it could be multiple people racing to point at each other?
Well, I had said that prior to Barbara's comments, which is that Alan does not want to spend the golden years of his life incarcerated. On top of that, he has his two sons that he managed to get involved with the Trump organization. Barry as the operator of Woolman Lasker Rink, as well as the Carousel in Central Park, and Jack on behalf of Ladder Capital. I mean, I've talked about this ad nauseum. And truth be told, he doesn't want to see them in prison either. So the question is going to be whether or not he's going to accept the responsibility himself and spend his golden years, or he's going to provide the testimony that the attorney general and the district attorney wants. It's one of the other. He doesn't get to pick and choose. Now, will Weisselberg at some point try to plead the fifth? That's just not going to work, because the documents that they have will not permit that. He will then place himself and his children in the same jeopardy that we were just talking about.
So you look at the journey here, a lot of times in the investigations and in the public discussion of it, everyone's sort of trying to imagine what these people are up against. You've actually been in the situation, and it's something you've, of course, spoken out on and evolved on. And so I'm curious if you could walk us through, based on your understanding of what we might call the 5 stages of Trump loyalty and how people evolve on it. If you remember for yourself, and I know you've written about it, when you started to change your view and realize that not only was there no protection for you, but there were other things in play, and where do you think Mr. Weisselberg may be on that spectrum?
Again, so it's not just Alan Weisselberg, but we'll use him as the example. What you ultimately find with Donald as this investigation continues is that Alan is is going to be thrown under the bus. He's going to be ignored. He's going to be denigrated. They're going to attack his credibility as much as possible when they realize that he is no longer on their side, that he is taking a position to protect himself. And that's when all bets are going to be off. And then Alan is going to have to make the determination, as will Barry and Jack and so many other people, whether or not fealty to Donald Trump means going to prison. And remember something, and you know this very well, Ari, that the district attorney and the attorney general, the Southern District of New York, they all have powers that most people don't understand how the strength of that power. And when they come at you with the full force of government, you really have no choice but to take the plea. Because, one, they could financially destroy you. And Alan, despite his position, is not a wealthy man where he can take on this fight. Certainly neither are his two children. And they will then, of course, the threat of incarceration is enough in order to get people to start to provide answers and cooperate. I probably should have done a 5K one based upon the over 350 hours worth of testimony, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. My goal was just to tell the truth, and that's what I did. And I'm thankful that all of the testimony that I provided, starting with the congressional testimony, the House oversight, as well as to the Attorney General, the District Attorney, and many other agencies, have managed to spawn these 18 investigations that are now showing fruit.
And you mentioned it's not just Weisselberg. We've been looking at him because of the leads on the investigation. But to that point, the management structure of the Trump organization is fairly small. It's certainly not transparent or anything like a public company. Walk us through how many people would be in the room in addition to, say, Trump and the CFO for the big decisions. I mean, how many people are really at that upper echelon that would be in the know that investigators would want to talk to?
Well, there were about 14 executive vice presidents, and that included the 3 children. So, take the 17 at best. At best, it's 17 plus Donald. And when I say executives, I'm talking about Alan Weisselberg as well, Matthew Calamari, the chief operating officer. You had general counsel, you had co-general counsel. I mean, there were, like I said, approximately 17 of us. Now, it depends upon what the issue was, would make a determination on who would be in the office. For some unknown reason, and being the guy that would usually have to fix Donald's mistakes and problems, I was in the office quite often for many of these conversations. Now, as it relates to his taxes and so on, that was always very private. So that would be legitimately Donald himself, along with Alan Weisselberg and a guy named Donald Bender from Mazer, the accounting company. Now, if it dealt with something that Don Jr. was working on, Ivanka, Eric, then they would be in the office for that specific. But look, nobody saw his tax returns. I would see them laid out each and every year on the massive 40-person table on the 26th floor across from my office. But I never inspected them. I never saw them, never got a copy of them. I would just see it when the door was open, and then they would lock the door so that nobody would have an opportunity to see them either. It was always just Donald, Alan Weisselberg, I say his name again, as well as the accounting firm.
And I'm running over on time. My last question is the shortest. You mentioned your cooperation. You've spoken to the DA investigation many times. Is it your understanding at this point that you don't need to speak to them again?
Oh, no. I will no doubtedly be speaking to them again. There's so much information and there's so much confusion around the operation that, listen, when they need me, they call on me, and I'm there to provide the answers to their questions.
And if this goes to trial,
it's funny because if this goes to trial,
Michael, if this goes to trial, will you testify against Trump Org executives or the founder?
If they ask me to do so, absolutely. I've already given them my word. What's interesting is in your earlier segment, you made a statement that, obviously Alan has not been charged yet and there's no conviction yet. But you could rest assured that bringing in a guy like Mark Pomerantz in the DA's office, and you know this so well, Ari, as a lawyer yourself, bringing in the DA's office, now combine that with the Attorney General's office, the chance that there's not going to be indictments coming out and there's not going to be convictions. It's kind of like me waking up tomorrow 7 feet tall and playing power forward for the Knicks, right? It's just not going to happen. It's there, right? It's going to happen.
Right.
So
and I completely understand. We call on you as someone who was in the room and has been through this process. So as a witness, you saying that I think is very interesting. Viewers can hear that. I'm interested to hear you say it. As the journalist, I remind people we aren't there yet, so we don't know, and we always remind people who has and hasn't been charged for informational purposes. I also get what you're saying. Right. You were there, so it's interesting coming from you, sir. Now I'm way over on time. Michael Cohen, thank you, sir.
Ari, great to see you.
Great to have you. Up ahead, we have new information. Republican lawmakers are increasingly saying things about January 6th that aren't true, despite the clear video evidence. Take a look. We're joined by Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain podcast. You heard the quote. If you look at the video footage, you would think, well, what would you think?
Well, thanks for having me, Ari. Great show tonight. It's really unbelievable. We all saw what happens, and the most egregious part of this, and the most egregious contradiction, is that Congressman Greg Pence himself voted against the January 6th commission. And I think that audio, if I heard that audio correctly, that was the audio where the people were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." I think Liz Cheney gave us a hint. I think Liz Cheney gave us a hint over the weekend when she was on one of the Sunday morning shows saying that Kevin McCarthy could be subpoenaed. You know, her father, who named himself Darth Cheney, probably a guest on my show yesterday who said he probably still gets some type of briefing, some type of inside information just because of who he is. I think she knows something. I think others know something. I think Kevin McCarthy knows what he did, and they are afraid of a commission where they might be subpoenaed and they have to testify as to what role they played. Those tourists that came in the days and weeks earlier were there to do reconnaissance, or in the vernacular, case the joint. So they all are complicit in this. And then even today, to vote against the budget, the increase in the funding for the Capitol Police so they could do a better job. And I know some of the squad voted against it because they're against further police funding and militarization. I respect that. But the party, the GOP, Ari, that is all about Blue Lives Matter, back the blue, voted today to defund the police. The very thing that they attack Democrats and progressives for saying and doing, that very slogan, they voted today to defund the police, specifically the Capitol Police. So I think they are showing their hand, and I hope the American people realize what this party is really up to.
Yeah, and the level of political duress they're under, given that this was an attack on their very workplace, and as you mentioned, on some in their party, as if that's even the point. That's a lesser reason compared to the more important ones. All of it playing out in public, and we wanted to give the video evidence. The gentleman there asking for the videos, well, there you are. You can see him on national TV tonight and judge for yourself if it was a tourist visit. Mark Thompson, always good to have you. We were quick because of all the breaking news, so thank you. We'll have you back. We fit in another break, and then we have... The feds have a lot of evidence from their Giuliani raids. There's a newly unsealed court filing from prosecutors that reveals FBI agents have more than we knew until today. They actually seized 18 electronic devices of the president's former lawyer. It's more than previously thought. The feds scouring all of it. The filing also confirming the government will move forward on something we've covered here, and that's important for doing it right, using a special master. Basically, this is an independent legal thing to review those materials while providing maximum independence and protection for Donald Trump as the person whose attorney-client privilege communications might end up reviewed. That's an update on a big story, on a big night. We wanted to get it in because it's news. Thank you, as always, for watching The Beat. The Readout with Joy Reid is up after this short break.